Sam knew that a submarine was waiting for him as he entered the meeting. The Argonaut, a mouldy vessel that had taken him to the brink of Atlantis, would be there. As Sam sought an exit, the crew were frozen in escape. As Sam watched the clock, the captain ignored squid warnings silently. And so at lunch, Sam would take out his book and end their wait.
A squid? Where? You're the colonel from his bathtub.
Amazon. Bring a book to life.
Whether you're singing songs dressed as a traffic cone at the Ali Pali, roaring yourself hoarse on the first day of Cheltenham, or hugging a complete stranger after a 98th minute win, at Virgin Bet, we always want you to have a great time without losing track of your betting. So whilst there's no such thing as a dead cert, it's a good bet will help you keep it fun and safe. Visit our safer gambling hub for more info. Virgin Bet, a good bet. Bet responsibly. 18 plus. Gambleaware.org.
Hello and welcome to the Game Football Podcast from The Times. This is part 2 of our club-by-club Premier League preview shows, taking you round the country, talking to Times reporters about teams on their patch. On today's show, we'll be covering Liverpool, Everton, Chelsea, Bournemouth and Fulham. And joining me, Tom Clarke, we've got a show of two halves. Later on, we'll hear from the football reporter Pete Rutzler, but first we are joined by the Northern football correspondent for The Times, Paul Joyce. Joycey, good morning.
Morning.
How are we doing?
Good.
Ready to get stuck in.
Yeah.
Ready to get stuck in. Let's start with the champions then. Now, listeners are going to keep the same format that we did for part 1. So let's whiz through Liverpool's very busy summer of transfer dealings so far. Just to recap you, we've had Florian Wirtz sign, Jeremy Frimpong, Arman Pesci, Milos Kerkez, Freddie Woodman and Hugo Ekitike. Out, we've seen Trent Alexander-Arnold, we've got Kelleher, Jaros, Nathaniel Phillips, Harvey Davis has gone out on loan, Jarrell Kwanzaa has left as well, Luis Diaz and Tyler Morton. Paul, that's obviously a very busy summer of transfer dealings already for the champions, but the big question, of course, all fans are asking is, what, if anything, might happen next?
Well, I think there's certainly going to be a push to bring a defender in. They have been looking at a young Italian centre-back, Giovanni Leone, who plays for Parma. He's only 18, and Liverpool have, over recent seasons, tried to make a point of recruiting an up-and-coming centre-back with, so far, very little success.
Right.
If you go back 3 summers, they tried for Levi Colwell. He was at Chelsea, and that proved a no-go. 2 years ago, they were in for Lenny Yoro, but couldn't guarantee playing time, and he went to Manchester United. Dean Huijsen at Bournemouth was a big target this summer, but obviously they got trumped by Real Madrid. And it feels like a similar situation could be unfolding with Leone in that he's 18. He was managed by Christian Chivu at Parma last season. Chivu's just taken over at Inter Milan this summer. And I think there's a feeling now that because the 18-year-old wants to play at that age, staying in Italy carries an appeal as well, that Inter are favourites for that deal at the moment. So that would leave Liverpool... Liverpool are short on centre-backs. That was seen on Monday in the friendly against Athletic Bilbao. They only had one recognised centre-back because of illness to Van Dijk and injury to Gomez.
Right. And
that was Ibrahima Konate, who's in the final year of his contract, and Real Madrid's sort of shadow is looming on that situation. The other one to probably watch is Mark Guay at Crystal Palace. There's a definite interest in him. A lot will depend on Palace's asking price, and even if they're willing to sell towards the end of the window. He's probably a £50 million player for Palace, even with a year to go on his deal. Liverpool wouldn't value him at that price. I think it would need to be probably considerably lower than that for them to move now. The only caveat is there is, as I said, a need to get a centre-back in. So I think that's a situation worth watching. And then we've got the saga with Alexander Isak and what happens with him, and whether Newcastle are able to sign a 1 or 2 replacements, and whether they then are willing to sanction his departure, and again, at what price.
Yeah, very interesting. You've obviously you mentioned the admiration for Isak in a brilliant piece you did towards the end of last season, and have then reported on the transfer since then. The most recent one of those being that Liverpool were kind of staying firm at the last bid that they made. Interesting to hear you there talk about both Isak and the centre-back situation. Liverpool obviously fantastic businessmen in the transfer window. Do you sense that, I'm kind of getting a sense from you that they will hold firm on both a centre-back and the Isak deal, and it'll only be right for them. They won't be forced, their hand won't be forced in either scenario. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's the way that these tended to do the business, and it's been successful for them. I mean, if you go back 12 months, they didn't do anything other than Federico Chiesa to set up the deal for Mamardashvili to come in this summer.
Yeah.
And it was very much the case of, well, if the players aren't available, we're not just going to buy players for the sake of it, which I think is a mistake that other clubs have made. And by holding firm and doing with that stance and adhering to that strategy, you then have the money to do what they've done this summer, which is obviously at the moment £295 million spending, which is a lot by Liverpool standards. Although I would say that is going to be offset by a lot of sales if Núñez goes to Al Hilal for 46 million, which, I expected him to get permission to do his medical today. That would bring sales up to about 190 million. And, that you have to look at the two columns together, not just in isolation. I would say there's further possibility of players leaving in terms of Harvey Elliott. There's a bit of interest from RB Leipzig. Probably a little bit surprised that there's not been more from the Premier League. That may be to do with how Liverpool are pricing him. That's meant to be around 40 million. But I would say that other than the sort of maybe Liverpool's, Arsenal's, Manchester United, Man City did a lot of stuff early, it does feel like a lot of the clubs in the top flight haven't really done too much yet. So maybe that will heat up in the last few weeks. Yeah. Chiesa could go as well.
Right.
That would leave Liverpool probably a number of attackers down from last season. You add in the unimaginable loss of Diego Jota, and I can see why people are saying they're maybe a little bit light in attack. I've got to say, it didn't feel like that when it was at the Athletic Bilbao game on Monday. The sort of fluidity that they played with, the rotation of different players. You had Wirtz in between Salah and Ekitike at one point, Gakpo dropping a bit deeper. Frimpong was almost a right winger at some points with Salah cutting inside. Obviously, it only takes a couple of injuries, and Liverpool will want to go deep into the Champions League this season.
Yeah.
I think the fact that Slot has referenced that PSG game so often since it took place shows his sort of appetite to make greater inroads in that competition this time. So there will be a lot of games to be played this season. Have they got enough striking options? I can see why people will say maybe not, but I don't think that would then lead them to go into Isak at any price.
Yeah.
I just don't think that's how Liverpool work.
Yeah.
I think the emphasis still has to come from Newcastle. I personally said in the mentioned in the sort of transfer roundup that's in the paper today that at some point, in my view, the risk of trying to integrate Isak back into the Newcastle squad is surely less than Newcastle going out and buying somebody who is effectively sixth choice and spending 50-60 million pounds on that. Obviously, I'm not privy to the sort of the atmosphere around Isak, but for a club that's gone from Liam Delac to João Pedro to Ekitike to Sesko to Cunha and Mbeumo to now be looking further down the line. If that was Liverpool would and did, in the case of Philip Coutinho, say, no, it's too late in the transfer window now. We can't do what we want to do to the best of our abilities. You're not moving in this window.
Yeah. They
then use 6 months to sort themselves out, get the ducks in a row, and then the first week in January, Coutinho went and they brought in Van Dijk, and the Van Dijk situation was more complex because they'd wanted to sign him in May and then fell foul of sort of Southampton claiming the illegal approaches and stuff like that. So it was a little bit more complicated. But I just think that Liverpool are the model club at the moment in terms of how they're run.
Yeah.
Newcastle are, in the absence of a sporting director, which is remarkable in this day and age, are doing things on the hoof, and I think that shows in the two clubs and how they've gone about the business so far this summer.
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating insight as ever from Paul Joyce. Make sure you're keeping up to date with all his latest transfer news on the Times website, on the Times socials as well. You mentioned Newcastle's situation. We'll be hearing from Martin Hardy on the Newcastle position early next week, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Paul, you talk a lot about the players coming in there. There's one player that you touched on pre-season there that's captured the imagination of a lot of Liverpool fans. 16-year-old Rio Numoha, an attacking player. He's made his name for himself in this summer. I want to come back to talk about some of those new players and how they might be integrated and how this new look Liverpool might look. But just in the sense of him being a new player, I know he's not a new signing. Just tell us a little bit more about him. And obviously there'll be a lot of Liverpool fans listening to this, all fans of clubs, when there's a young player coming through going, play him, everything like that.
Yeah.
What do you expect from him and what have you seen from him, having watched him a couple of times?
Well, he came from Chelsea at the start of last season. There was a big fallout because Chelsea recognised him as a potential star. John Terry posted on social media he is and will be a top player. So it's very much the emphasis was on the present. He made his debut against Accrington in a FA Cup game. Went back to play with the 21s at the end of last season because he's not 17 until the end of the month, I think.
End of August, he turned 17.
Yeah, end of August, yeah. I think they worked on his finishing quite hard. The former Liverpool under-21s coach Barry Lutis did a lot of sort of work on his end product because I think they felt that very talented in one-on-ones situations, but it needed to be translated into benefits for the team. And I think the fact that he's sort of shot in pre-season shows that he's taken that on board. Very quick, very, very tricky, but there has been a couple of goals as well, 2 or 3 goals in pre-season. He scored one against Athletic Bilbao on Monday where he basically picked the ball up on that just inside the Athletic half, ran unchecked and just casually sort of found the corner of the net. I think he will be earmarked for sort of bits off the bench in the first instance, and I think that's realistic with the options that Liverpool do have in the squad. You know, Carabao Cup games would be an obvious sort of route for him. But it was interesting yesterday. There was a report came out in I think it was L'Equipe about Bradley Barcola, the PSG player, and that Liverpool were interested in him and it would take 100 million to bring him in. And when we were checking out those stories, they were very much downplayed by Liverpool. And one of the reasons was because they want to keep the pathway open for Rio, and which I thought was quite a statement, really, in terms of. And listen, you know, everybody has to keep this in sort of context and not get too carried away. But the reason why he came to Liverpool was because he probably thought that the pathway was blocked at Chelsea. If you look at all the wingers that they've signed there, and young wingers as well, the attraction for Liverpool was that there was a pathway. And I just thought that was quite revealing that they even introduced Rio's name into that conversation when the links came out about Barcola. So he's obviously somebody who they rate highly. You know, I think Arne Slot showed last season that he's capable of improving players or some players. And I think his progress is one to watch. I don't think we'll finish the season with him playing 50 appearances, but yeah, I think he could be a useful asset for Liverpool at times.
Yeah, fascinating, hugely exciting player. Let's just wrap up Liverpool with two points I want to mention. You talked about some of those signings coming in. Will we see a new look Liverpool? You know, they've got new full-backs. No Trent Alexander-Arnold, of course, who was so integral to the way that they play. Florian Wirtz is a fascinating talent going forward, can play across the front line, as can Hugo Ekitike. Regardless of whether they make more signings, this is a much changed champions starting 11, isn't it, that we're going to see at the start of this season?
Yeah, I think so. I think we did an article towards the end of last season. We discussed it, and it was about how this was basically going to be a title that was won by a team in transition, which is obviously the opposite to how it normally happens. That the champions win the trophy, and then there's maybe one or two tweaks. But we're not seeing that with Liverpool this summer. We're seeing a pretty unprecedented, I would say, sort of situation, and there's risks that come attached with that in terms of, you know, bedding in all the players at the same time. See, pre-season was horribly sort of disrupted at the start by the loss of Jota. You know, that shouldn't be forgotten either. But the absence of tournaments means that Slot has had his players together more than he did last season. And I think you could see in the game, certainly on Monday that I saw, I obviously wasn't in the Far East, but I think you could see some of the combinations already evident. I think it's, as I said earlier, sort of fluidity of how they're all going to line up was really interesting. And in the second of the games, it was a much stronger Liverpool lineup. So the front six was basically Szoboszlai, Gravenberch, Salah, Gakpo, Ekitike, Wirtz. Within that, you've not got McAllister, Curtis Jones. It feels like they've got a few options, and I just think it will be interesting. I think Slot will rotate a lot more this season. I think he didn't do last season because he didn't fully trust the players. He basically won the league with 14 players.
Yeah.
But that week where they did suffer the loss to PSG on penalties and the loss to Newcastle in the Carabao Cup final, I think that left an impression on him in terms of we were in a good moment then. We were a little bit feeling the pace of the season at that time. The intensity of the French league just isn't the same. So PSG can get away with maybe playing at higher intensity or matching English clubs' intensity in the Champions League because they don't do it every week in League One. I think Newcastle were just probably more motivated on the day in the Carabao Cup final because it was 70 years and this great milestone landmark. But I do think Slot thinks that if he'd have rotated more, maybe they could have come through that week in better shape. So I think he will rotate more. I think we'll see more. Yeah, I mean, what you said there about where Wirtz plays, I think that's going to be the interesting thing because he basically had freedom to do what he wanted from an attacking point of view on Monday. And when he wasn't in possession of the ball, what was really noticeable was his desire to get into the penalty area. So I think he's going to be somebody who is a real attacking threat. But on the flip side of that, he was also dropping deep and he works hard off the ball. So I think, I know I was impressed with sort of the impression Ekitike made as well. I think there will be variations in how Liverpool play this season. Yeah,
absolutely fascinating. I can't wait to see how they line up in the early weeks of the season. Let's just finish Liverpool with Arne Slot. I mean, absolutely incredible achievement last season to come in, take over from Jurgen Klopp and win that title, as you say, with a team in transition. This summer, he's had to navigate lots of changes to his squad, and obviously, as you mentioned, the tragic loss of Diogo Jota. You talked there about twice now about the scars, if you like, of the Champions League defeat against PSG. That to me suggests a manager at this incredibly high level who is just relentless and ruthless in his pursuit of success. You know, he's not resting on his laurels. He's not thinking, hey, I've come in and won the Premier League. But this will be a different type of test, won't it, for him? Because he's going into this season with Liverpool as favourites for a lot of people, particularly with some of the business that they've done. And as you say, with an expectation and a desire to do well in the Champions League and other cup competitions. How do you think he'll navigate that? Obviously, you'll be hearing from him in a press conference on Friday that you'll be covering for the Times, so make sure, listeners, you check out that. But just a final word from you on Arne Slot as Liverpool manager going into his second season and some of the challenges that he might face?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways he'll be embracing it. I mean, the PSG references, because he's referenced it a lot, which I found interesting, really. He said that was the best game he's ever been involved in as a manager, and if you do go back to that night, I mean, I think Liverpool had a couple of chances from Salah in the first 15 minutes, and if they've got those, having won their first leg in obviously strange circumstances, 1-0, I do think Liverpool, with Anfield right on it, I think Liverpool would have been hard to shift by PSG in that tie if they'd have taken those opportunities early on. So the margins are very fine. I think he will think that there's an opportunity to sort of kick on now. I'm a little bit not against the Diaz signing, but I just think Diaz had done well. Sorry, the Diaz sale. But I just thought Diaz did well for Liverpool last season. I'm not really sure in me own mind why the contract situation couldn't really get resolved with him. It obviously came down to finance, and there was a big disparity between what he wanted and what the club was prepared to offer somebody who's 29 in January. I think Slot will believe he's got a better squad than he had last season, more options than he had last season. And if you look at the amount of times that he sort of influenced the game for Liverpool with like a tweak or a substitution, then I think he will feel probably a bit emboldened by the hand that he has now compared to last season. But as you rightly say, there will be challenges within that. The target is on Liverpool's back now. They've not won back-to-back titles since 82, 83, 83, 84. So it's a long time. Slot didn't win back-to-back titles with Feyenoord. Yeah, I'm interested to see how they sort of cope this season with that increased expectation, because, as you said, they've not probably been favourites for a title since 1990-91.
Absolutely fascinating to see what happens with the champions this season. Let's move across the city to another team under a lot of pressure, I would say, perhaps with a new era starting, with a new stadium. Everton, they finished the season with David Moyes with a farewell to Goodison, but it's not been necessarily the summer that perhaps most fans would want. Let me just, as I say, recap some of their dealings. I'm going to start with the outs first. Neil Maupay moving to Marseille, and then a big list of fairly experienced players all leaving the club. Abdoulaye Doucouré, Ashley Young, Asmir Begovic, Mason Holgate, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and then also Billy Creelan and João Virginia have gone as well. Carlos Alcaraz has come in, Mark Travers, Tierno Barry, Adam Asnau and Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall. Lots of some experienced players left there, Paul, and some signings come in. I mentioned there Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall just at the end there. He was a player and a move that you teed up in a piece that you wrote for The Times over the weekend. In that same piece, you also mentioned the interest and moves that they have made for Southampton youngster Tyler Dibbling. And in that piece, you also mentioned an interest in Jack Grealish. Just give the listeners a sense of what might happen with Everton in the rest of the summer window.
Well, I think the immediate priority is to recruit a right winger. That's been one of the targets all summer, and they've had a bit of frustration in that. They originally went for Francesco Conceição at Porto. He finished last season at Juventus on loan, and he basically wanted to go back to Juventus permanently. And that's what's transpired. Now, the fact that didn't prevent Everton from sort of trying to bring him to the Premier League sort of reflects the policy this summer, in that they're trying to be as ambitious as they can while operating on a sort of budget which allows them to spend probably £35 million on a winger. If they go above that, they probably don't have the money to go above that, because, as you outlined with all the outgoings, they need to still do quite a lot to the squad. But if in addition, if they were to target a group of players above that sort of value, then most of those players would want European football, and that's one thing that Everton can't offer them this season. And I think that has been a bit of an issue, especially as 9 Premier League clubs can. The Dibbling one is interesting because they have sort of tried to push the boat out for him. My understanding is that they recognised as long ago as last weekend that was going to be a very difficult deal to do. There was a bid that went in initially for £27 million with some add-ons, then 35 million. And then last Monday, there was a bid or the Monday of this week, there was a bid of around 40 million plus a sell-on clause. But the two clubs are far apart on their valuations. Southampton countered with a deal which would be well in excess of 50 when a complicated sell-on deal was factored in as well. And I mean well in excess of 50. So, the Dibbling one, despite some of the noise, I think Everton feel like it's going to have to take Southampton to really climb down on that now for that to get done. And I think they will be looking elsewhere, which isn't ideal. And maybe that's where the Grealish interest comes in. What was surprising about this one yesterday was it was presented as though Everton have contacted Manchester City on Wednesday. That wasn't the case. There wasn't contact between the clubs on Wednesday. There had been contact previously, and Everton know the situation with Grealish in terms of Man City are looking for as much wage recoupment as possible. Everton would believe that the deal would be about £12 million to take him on loan for a single season. The numbers don't necessarily put them off, but there's other factors that need to be put into that. Namely, does Grealish want to go to Everton?
Yeah.
And that's not certain. Were these latest stories, to sort of flush out what else might be there for him. We're 10 days before the start of the season and he's not got a club in a year that, he's said to be wanting to go to the World Cup with England. So he really needs to get his situation sorted out. There's also the fact that he hadn't necessarily been what Everton needed when they were trying to do Dibbling. Obviously, he plays on the left, and Everton have got Ndiaye on the left now, and they've had Dwight McNeil as maybe a number 10. They could move Dwight McNeil onto the right, use Grealish as a number 10 if, as seems likely, Dibbling isn't resurrected. So I think the Grealish situation was always going to be one that would come late in the window, and I still think that will be the case. But there's a lot. I would say there are a lot of hurdles to overcome in that one if that is to come off for Everton. And then it's basically they need another midfielder, maybe a right back. David Moyes has said that he wanted sort of 8 to 10 signings. They've got 5 in now. But that includes a backup goalkeeper and a 18-year-old left back who came in from Bayern Munich in Adam Asnu, who would initially only challenge Vitaly Mykolenko at left back. He's not come in to start the season, so to speak. So I think there's still a bit of work for Everton to do. I think, it's such a new sort of era for them with the move into the new stadium. The final test event for that is on Saturday when they play Roma, which is the other team in the Three King Groups, or one of the other teams in the Three King Groups umbrella of clubs. So, yeah, Everton sort of stand on the brink of this new era, but I think from Moyes' perspective, he's desperate to get a team that the fans can sing about together, and there is still a bit of work that needs to be done on that between now and the end of the window.
Lots of work to do. You summed it up quite nicely there. I'm going to ask the final question. It's quite a big, broad question, but I think you slightly summed it up nicely there with that line about Moyes wanting a team that the fans can sing about in this beautiful new stadium. But more specifically, what do you think for David Moyes and for Everton success would look like this season? Is it that getting a team that they can be proud of, and that maybe it doesn't quite matter as much where they finish? Of course, it always matters, Tom. That's a stupid thing to say, but what do you think success looks like for Everton? Is it about growth? Is it about moving up the table? Do they want cup competition priority? Do they want Europe? What is the priority, do you think, for Everton? What does success look like?
I think a little bit of everything that you said there, really. I mean, Europe is a big statement at this stage of the season when we look at where the squad is, but they'll want to push on from last season. They finished this. They played very well under Moyes in the second half of the season, and he will again. I think when I look at the signings they've made so far, I don't see anybody who is a surefire thing. I think the best asset Everton still have is David Moyes in terms of driving standards and pushing the players and demanding more from the players. So I think he will want to push on. He'll want to establish the new stadium as a difficult place for teams to come to, as Goodison Park was, which that's a challenge in itself, because as we've seen with other teams, moves to new stadium become a bit fraught. I mean, the one time Arne Slot lost his cool last season was at Goodison Park, when the fans are on top of you and the rage, and it's not. I mean, the stadium has been designed so it is very steep-sided. So the feeling is that you are looking down, but it isn't going to be Goodison straight away. So I think that's going to be a target. I think they will be desperate for runs in the cup competitions. It's 31 years since Everton won a trophy, which is, obviously far too long. So I think that there's a list of ambitious targets that they'll want to reach, and I'm loath to say just staying in the Premier League should be a target for Everton, because they're too good a club for that. I think it's going to be maybe 2 or 3 years before the benefits of the new stadium are starting to be fully realised in terms of the revenue that will generate. There is the sense that it would bring in £65 million more per year than Goodison did if Everton are playing, lots of home games and in cup competitions and so forth, and maybe in Europe. So you can see straight away what a sort of transformative sum of money that is for a club that has been constrained by PSR rules in recent seasons, and to an extent continues to be in this window. That's why they can't just go out and spend 50 million 5 times on different players. That they've got a budget whereby if they spend 40 million on X, they might only be able to spend 15 on Y, and that's part of the jigsaw that they're still trying to put together.
Yeah, a really interesting season ahead for all Everton fans. I can't wait to see that first game in that new stadium. Paul, just before I let you go, I understand you've got some updated news to bring listeners about Liverpool regarding what they may do before the end of the window. Let us know.
As of sort of Thursday morning, Darwin Núñez has agreed to the Al Hilal deal for 46 million. He's been at the AXA training ground today saying his goodbyes. He'll now fly to probably Germany, where Al Hilal are holding the training camp, to have a medical and to undergo all the finishing touches on the deal. It's our understanding that Liverpool will look to sign an attacker to replace him, but as we sort of explained in the first part of the show, it's not just going to be. There's criteria attached to it, basically, in terms of, is the player really attainable, which is obviously pertaining to Isak. Will Newcastle actually let him go, or is their situation so dire that they think they have to keep hold of an unhappy player? And also another factor will be the fee. When Newcastle rejected the £110 million million bid last Friday, there was still stories that their valuation was 150 million, which is probably realistic in a lot of ways. He scored a lot of goals over two seasons for Newcastle now in the Premier League, but I don't think Liverpool would go to that much for a player. I don't think that they see that in their view as being market value. So, yeah, they will try and sign somebody to fill the void that Núñez, Diaz and all the others that we spoke about earlier has left. But whether it's Isak, that'll be dependent on whether Newcastle are actually prepared to sell, and the price, and if that is the case, the price that they would sell at. Another instalment in the saga, we're not really that much further on. Liverpool will have alternative targets. That's just how they work. It's interesting that we obviously spoke about Bradley Barcola earlier in the podcast. That doesn't seem to be a goer. So they will have targets. It's just, let's see what happens next with Isak. And in many ways, the whole Isak saga has always been in Newcastle's hands. They're the ones who have the player, regardless of him being unhappy. They're the ones that determine what happens next. Liverpool are there, but as we've sort of tried to explain, it won't be at any cost, and that's just not the Liverpool way of doing things.
Really interesting proof, as you say, Paul, of this ongoing saga changing all the time. In the time that we have spent recording this segment of the podcast, already news changing and updating all the time. A reminder to keep up to date with the very best in the business from the Times Sport football team, including Paul Joyce. Paul, thank you very much for joining us. Listeners, stick with us. We're going to be back after a short break with Pete Rutzler to talk about Chelsea, Bournemouth and Fulham. We'll see you in a minute.
Whether you're singing songs dressed as a traffic cone at the Ali Pali, roaring yourself hoarse on the first day of Cheltenham, or hugging a complete stranger after a 98th minute win, at Virgin Bet, we always want you to have a great time without losing track of your betting. So whilst there's no such thing as a dead cert, it's a good bet will help you keep it fun and safe. Visit our safer gambling hub for more info. Virgin Bet, a good bet. Bet responsibly. 18 plus. Gambleaware.org.
Welcome back to the Game Football Podcast from The Times. These are our club-by-club Premier League previews running through all 20 clubs in the top flight. In the first half of the show, we heard from Paul Joyce talking about Liverpool and Everton, and now we're joined by the London football reporter Pete Rutzler to run through clubs including Chelsea, Fulham and Bournemouth. Pete, hello.
Hey Tom, how you doing?
Very good, thank you. All the glamours of journalism exemplified by you today, joining us to record this podcast from your car. Am I right?
That is correct. I am in the Citroen C1. It's doing a good job, soundproofing, everything.
Excellent. The kind of modern studios that only the top level of journalism can provide. Let's dive straight into it and talk about Chelsea, a team, of course, who we have talked about on the podcast this summer, of course, with their exceptional performance in the Club World Cup, winning that title out in America. Just going to follow the same format for all teams, listeners. So I'm going to run through Chelsea's very busy summer in terms of incomings and outgoings. They've brought in Liam Delap, Estevao Willian, Dario Esugu, Kendry Paez, Mamadou Sarr, João Pedro, Jamie Gittins and Jarrell Hato, the latest signing from Ajax. Out go Bashir Humphreys, Lucas Bergstrom, Marcus Bettinelli, Kepa Arrizabalaga, Mateus Amugu, Noni Madueke, Jordi Petrovic, Mike Penders, João Felix, Kendry Paez has gone back out on loan. Mamadou Sarr has also gone out on loan. Kiernan Drewsbury Hall has gone to Everton and Mark Gui has gone to Sunderland. Pete, they're never dull, Chelsea, are they, when it comes to incomings and outgoings? Always busy in the transfer market. Just firstly, can we expect many more signings coming in and many more players going out?
Firstly, thanks for reading them out. That's actually very helpful to just keep refreshing the memory. You might need to do it again halfway through just to make sure we're on the right track. But yes, they might do a bit more. They're still in talks with RB Leipzig about Xavi Simons. The interest in Alejandro Garnacho has not gone away either. Both of those, though, probably need more sales. And I think what's sort of characterised this summer a little bit was their UEFA settlement agreement for breaching their financial rules, UEFA's financial rules, which came out early in the summer, which basically requires them, beyond the fines, to register a positive transfer balance on their A-list squad, which basically means to register more players for the Champions League, they need to sell players and make a profit based on not just transfer fees, as we see, but also salaries. So there's definitely a bit of pressure on them to sell, and they've actually done that pretty well so far. I think a few of them have been a bit unexpected in terms of Joao Felix comes to mind. I mean, that deal could be worth, with the add-ons, about 44 million, which, considering his poor season at Chelsea, his poor loan at AC Milan, that kind of fee is a big thank you from Al Nassr in Saudi Arabia for that. Keenan Dewsbury-Hall's recently just gone to Everton, 25 million as well. They paid about 30 million for him last summer. So those are the deals that they're trying to get through to open up more space. But yes, your initial question, they could do more. And the timing is interesting, because the reason I'm in this situation is because I've just been to see Enzo Maresca for a pre-match press conference ahead of their friendlies this weekend, and he's revealed that Levi Colwill has suffered an injury. We don't know the severity yet, but from my understanding, they're pretty concerned about it. So that, again, could change things at centre-back too.
Really interesting. So just they could be signings anywhere. There's no particular area. I always get that impression with Chelsea that under this regime, that if there are talented players out there to be signed, they could well be in for them as long as the money's right and the finance and the balance of the books is right. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think for what they want to do for the rest of the window is certainly a wide player or a creative player, hence the pursuit of Xavi Simons. He's sort of a winger but can also play inside. He's that kind of profile, probably maybe to sort of fit the Christopher Nkunku position in the squad. It's never really worked for him, but he's a player that Chelsea would like to sell as well. And then also Garnacho. So you get the sense that it's that end of the pitch that they want to sort of work on. Centre-back has always been a topic, and I think if Colwell's injury is as serious as, which I think it may be the fear, then maybe that they'll revisit that as well.
Really interesting. I mean, it all comes down to all these players coming in, and as I mentioned already, that great success at the Club World Cup, winning that tournament with the brilliant victory in the final against the mighty PSG, showing the rest of Europe how to beat Luis Enrique's Paris Saint-Germain side. It comes back to a question that we asked a lot of you and the rest of your colleagues on the Times football team last season. What is success for Chelsea? Last season, it was all about that big debate, getting into the Champions League, winning the Conference League. That is the bare minimum. Surely the expectation goes up a notch now, particularly with that Club World Cup win. We've talked about this before in the summer, but now they've made more signings and you've had time to reflect, and obviously just spoke to Enzo Maresca himself, as you say. Are we starting to suggest, or should we be suggesting, that Chelsea should be challenging for this Premier League title?
I think so. I think they should be in the conversation, at least for a significant period of the season. I think that's the natural next step. I think obviously securing consistent Champions League qualification is a positive, and it's something that the club will want to get back to. And I think that's probably a sort of a bare minimum now. But I think considering the steps that they made at the end of last season, one, getting back in the Champions League, winning a trophy, then winning the Club World Cup and playing as well as they did in the final. Yes, there are all the caveats about it being whatever, end of season, everything else. But they still played PSG, who were undisputably the best team in Europe, probably the world, and beat them, and comfortably beat them. So you'd think now, with the additions that they've made, the squad does look stronger. I think they've upgraded positions, particularly in the forward areas, as you mentioned. You would say that they should be in the conversation for a strong part of the season ahead. Obviously, the big unknown is what this turnaround time is going to do. It's an exceptionally short pre-season. It's pretty unprecedented, to be honest. And how that will impact the team, I think, maybe later in the season, not having done the heavier work, the heavy lifting, the more physical aspects of off-season, strength and conditioning work that you can't do during games. How much will that be a factor as the season goes on? I did a piece that's on the Times and talking about what some sports scientists think about it, and it may not be too different, and they think that, they may not be rusty. They might have a good start because they've got, they're coming from competitive competition going into the league. It is just that sort of unknown about what may happen further down the line. The thing is, they do have a deep squad, and they will need to use that, and the substitutions rule, and being able to rotate as much as possible, and that will be key to seeing how well they do.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned there talking to Enzo Maresca just now from that press conference. Did he have anything else to say? How did he seem? How was his mood? We were fascinated, as we always are, with hearing from you guys being in the room. You learn so much from being actually there talking to these managers. Maresca, quite a coy figure at times last season. How did he seem heading into this new campaign? Yeah,
probably similar, actually. Pretty low key, to be honest. He's probably a bit fed up of having to see us again so quickly. Yeah, nothing too exciting, and I think it's ahead of these friendlies they've got this weekend in the Visit Malta Weekender. So they're playing Bayer Leverkusen and AC Milan. Deflecting questions on transfers. Interesting on Nicholas Jackson, in that he didn't exactly make a big show of wanting him to stay. He just kind of said, well, let's see. We've got in two other strikers. Like anything else, anything could happen, which doesn't look particularly great for Jackson, obviously. But yeah, nothing, no particular excitement. No, I think it was very low key. It was very, very subtle, other than bringing up the Colwill injury, which he did on a question about the transfer window. So that suggests that it's about the severity of it.
Interesting. You mentioned before about Liam Delap and João Pedro coming in and doing well in that Club World Cup. We've talked about them on previous shows. You mentioned Jackson there. They've also signed Estevao, who can play up front as well, and Jamie Gittins, and you mentioned that pursuit of Xavi Simons. What might this Chelsea forward line look like? Because at times last season they looked fantastic. Obviously Noni Madueke is gone. You talk about Nkunku maybe leaving as well. What do you think the new Chelsea 2.0 under Enzo Maresca's attacking lineup might look like, with obviously Cole Palmer being the superstar at the fulcrum still? Would that be the case?
Yeah, absolutely. The general sense from Chelsea is that they want to have a very flexible front line. They want Enzo Maresca to have a lot of options, the ability to rotate, the ability to cope with the multiple competitions without necessarily taking away from the strength of the team. And I think when you look at last season, there were 2 months after January where they didn't have a centre forward, with Nicholas Jackson and Mark Gu both injured. They're now in a position where Jackson may go, Mark Gu's already gone, and they've got 2 other very good centre forward options who are different in profile. Delap has a bit more of the Jackson about him in terms of his presence, whereas João Pedro is much more of an intricate player, likes to bring others into play, and we saw that really impressively at the Club World Cup. And the same goes in the wide areas. It was trying to find consistency from those players, Jadon Sancho, Noni Madueke and Pedro Neto. That was hard to come by. And I think what they've done is they've added Gittins, who will impact from the left. Estevao is a really exciting player. Obviously, there's a bit of Maresca was keen to say today, look, he's a brilliant top talent, but he's going to take time to adapt. He's got to get used to the country, the league and everything else. But fundamentally, they want to get to a point where there is that fluidity and that flexibility in their front line that makes them a bit more unpredictable. So I think that's probably what we'll see, and it won't be as set. But I think the one constant, and maybe actually it's reflective of the whole of the midfield, but obviously Cole Palmer is there as the constant, alongside Enzo Fernandez and Moises Caicedo, players who, firmly established themselves now as the sort of untouchables within the Chelsea squad.
What do you think are the challenges for Maresca this season? Is it expectation? Is it managing that rotation? Or is it maybe an understanding that, I'm talking them up here, I think they will potentially challenge for this title, take on the enthusiasm and confidence from that Club World Cup win. If they can get these players to gel, I think they'll be right up there. But what do you see as the challenge, just to finish this segment on Chelsea? What do you think for Maresca the challenge is this season?
I think it's always with expectations in Chelsea, and I think it was harder last season because he wanted it to be, the message to be much more of a reset, that this team is much younger, we're starting from a lower base, it's going to take time, you need to be patient. I think that will apply again, and I think where where more of the focus will certainly be on style and how they look. And have they progressed? Are the team looking like a stronger side? And I think during the Club World Cup, we felt that, particularly in the final game, a game that actually saw Maresca tweak things. He trialed a different system out there in America. It was a much more of a 4-2-2-2, but it was a way of getting Reece James into the team along with Fernandez and Caicedo and Lavia when he's available. And that was a sort of a conundrum for most of last year. And what Maresca will need to do is sort of show that the team have taken that step forward, because the biggest criticism from supporters, particularly as we got into the second half of the season, was how the team looked and the nature of performances. It could be a lot slower. It's a lot more controlled, and just sort of marrying those two things together while achieving good results. It's fine if you're winning, but then obviously if you're not, then it becomes a much more difficult thing. And I think if there are those sort of slumps like we saw in the middle of last season, this year, the pressure will be a lot higher because the expectations have naturally risen because they have taken a step forward.
Expectations nice and high, but I think well justified. I'm excited to see how Chelsea get on this season. Let's move to another club in London. And if Chelsea are a team with loads and loads of players in the ins and outs category of the article that I'm reading on the Times website, which keeps you up to date with all the transfer goings on, then Fulham, quite frankly, are the quietest. Just one player brought in so far, Benjamin Lecomte from Montpellier. Out go Willian, Carlos Vinicius, Steve Bender and Luke Harris. Those two last players have gone out on loan. Pete, Fulham are a fascinating team. They're a team that we often praise on this podcast, particularly our colleague Alison Rudd, for their very efficient, very not quite frugal, but very logical way of doing things. They've made lots of signings in the past from Premier League rivals, players that maybe have been seen as discarded or unwanted by some of the bigger clubs, and made a really effective team under Marco Silva. What do you think about the lack of business so far? Are you hearing or expecting more business from them between now and the end of the window?
I don't think it's going to be massively busy. I think you're right. Fulham have sort of carved this niche of, I say, recycling players, rejuvenating players.
Yeah.
Recycling has a different feeling.
Hey, recycling's a very positive thing, Pete. We're in 2025. There's nothing wrong with a bit of recycling. But yeah, rejuvenating is perhaps more the word. Yeah,
definitely. And they're in a position now where I think the club feel they've got a good squad. Obviously, with the way they've done their recruitment, it's naturally been older. So last summer we saw, signs of slightly younger players coming in. Obviously, Emil Smith-Rowe being at the heart of that. And I think they want, and they feel the important thing is not losing key players. So they managed to persuade Kenny Tete to stay, the right back. They've kept some of their best young academy players as well. Josh Kings was around the first team last season. I expect to see more of him this year. Seth Ridgen, Luc de Fougerolles. So they're trying to marry these things together, ensuring a player pathway, and then also the fact that they are a club of their size. And this also applies to Bournemouth. Their revenue only takes them so far. They don't have the revenue on top of Premier League broadcast money. And when you actually look at their accounts, most of that money that comes in goes straight onto wages. They do have quite a large wage bill. I think it's about mid-table. It reflects where they are in the league. But then when you think about what it means to then spend money and the limitations of PSR, and you can only lose a certain amount per season, about 35 million, you're suddenly constrained about how much you can spend and how much you can do. And so if you're not making sales, previous seasons they sold Palhinha, they sold Mitrovic, and they adapted brilliantly, then you're limited in what else you can do. And I think, Marco Silva, he always wants to improve the team. I get the sense he wants new faces as well at the moment. I think they want to add a winger. As you said, they've lost Reece Nelson and Willian. Reece Nelson is in talks to come back, so that may be an option. How that's structured, I don't know. Samuel Chukwueze at Milan's another option for them. So I think they will add, but I think they're also in a position where they can't do a lot, and they feel like they need to protect what they have. They've got some great players like Anthony Robinson. Calvin Bassey is another one who could attract interest. And obviously Rodrigo Muniz, a Premier League number 9, who looks like he's got much further to develop as well. He's attracted interest. So holding what they have is key. And if you don't then add the extra money somewhere, then you can't really do much else. So they feel they've got a good team. It's just how they complement that and probably keep Marco Silva happy, because he's in the final year of his contract. He's done a brilliant job taking them back into the Premier League, stabilising them, no questions of relegation. He's keeping him happy is the other side of the coin. So it's an interesting dynamic, but that makes for a not particularly busy summer at the moment.
No, but it is fascinating, isn't it? Talking about Chelsea there, and even with Paul Joyce in the first half of the show, we were kind of recording added segments at the end, talking to him because the Liverpool situation has moved on again. I think I'm going to be a Fulham fan this season. It's just so wonderfully refreshing to hear you talk about them and then look at their squad and be like, actually, we've just got a really good squad. We did well last season. Let's try and do well again. It's almost like completely old school, but just looking at their squad. Bernd Leno, a very good Premier League goalkeeper. Some of the players you mentioned in defence, Tete, Calvin Bassey was one of my stars of last season. Joachim Andersen is a great player at Premier League level. And yeah, as you said, they've got great players going forward. Muniz, Iwobi, Pereira. These are incredibly good, solid players. Smith-Rowe, I would expect more to come from this season. And Anthony Robertson, obviously, as well, as a real star in the Premier League. What do you think, if let's say if it was a quiet window, but if they had to add 2 players, where would you be looking? Would it be in the attacking areas? Because to me, that defence looks quite solid.
Yeah, I'd certainly think they need to add a winger just because of who they've lost. Someone who can provide a bit more unpredictability, because that's what Willian sort of provided. That was Reece Nelson as well. They do miss that. Harry Wilson's looked incredibly bright in pre-season, and he had a similar pre-season, I think, a year or two ago, and then suffered a knee injury, and he's never quite managed to click into gear. He plays very well for Wales, so maybe it could be a big season for him. But I think that's the area, and I think they'd also want to maybe add a number 8 type midfielder. Again, you'd probably say if they do that, maybe that means Pereira could go. I mean, Pereira's been always linked potentially with leaving. No signs of that at the moment, but it is always that sort of case of someone comes in, someone comes out. But I think those are the kind of areas that would take the team forward. And certainly I think where Marco Silva would want to take the team forward as well.
Fulham and Fulham fans, I'm sure, listening to this, have got to be kind of maybe looking at the examples of Newcastle and Crystal Palace last season with those brilliant cup successes. They've got to be looking for a League Cup or a FA Cup run. Obviously, they did quite well in the FA Cup last season, but they've got to be targeting one of those trophies, haven't they, this season? Because if they can, they've got a team capable of winning it. Do you think there's a balance to be made, though, between Premier League stability or maybe going for Europe? You know, it comes back to that question that I've asked everyone. What is success for Fulham? Is it challenging? Is it more challenging for Europe, or would it be finish maybe 12th, 13th, but target a cup success instead?
I think both. I mean, last season there was disappointment because they fell off towards the end of the season, and there was the scope to maybe get 8th. And obviously Crystal Palace took that position, and it never would have worked that way. But they also had a fall off of the previous season as well. But I mean, they've got to the League Cup semi-final, they've got to the FA Cup quarter-final a couple of times. There is certainly, those are the things that they think they can achieve, and they feel very close to achieving them. Certainly Marco Silva will want to do that, something to sort of crown his sort of tenure at the club. And if you are a club of Fulham size, never won a major trophy, you know, last FA Cup final was in 1975, that's massive. You know, it is the same things we saw with Palace. Like, these are the club-defining, you know, era-defining, history-defining moments, and that's what you've got to sort of be chasing. And they had a brilliant run in the Europa League in 2010, 2011, and I think trying to get back to that would be incredible. It's obviously incredibly difficult when you look at the nature of, I mean, you could pick 7-8 teams with astonishingly bigger budgets than what Fulham have. But if you can stay in that conversation and maybe nick a place with those falling off United, Spurs type seasons, then that's great. I think that's less likely over the longer term. So you are looking at those cups, and you know, they would fancy themselves to beat any team on a given day. So again, I think they'll take them seriously. They have done always under Silva, and I expect they'll do the same this year.
Yeah, really interesting to see how Fulham get on. Fulham fans, if you've got points you'd like to make or questions you'd like to ask the team in future shows, get in touch with me, tom.clarke@thetimes.co.uk. And of course, that goes for all other supporters of the other 19 clubs in the league as well. Let's finish this part 2 episode of our club by club guide with a look at Bournemouth. Quite quiet again in the transfer window, but with some massive outgoings. They've signed Adrien Truffert from Reims, and Georgi Petrovic, as we mentioned, coming in from Chelsea, the goalkeeper. But out go Dean Hewson, the centre-back who starred last season. He's gone to Real Madrid. Milos Kerkez as well, the left-back, of course, has gone to Liverpool. Jadon Anthony, Daniel Jebison has gone out on loan, as has Max Aarons, Mark Travers and Joe Rothwell as well. Pete, Bournemouth, like Fulham, very similar, a team much praised in that bracket and in the teams in the middle of the Premier League, if you like, with aspirations to break into Europe. Did absolutely brilliantly last season under Andoni Iraola, a manager as well as the players who is looked at by other teams. What do you expect from them? As I mentioned there, 2 players signed, but some big names out. Will Bournemouth fans be worried about maybe more outgoings, or should they be excited about some incomings?
I think it's part. I think Bournemouth accept this as well. That's just part of their model, right? And I think it's interesting because Fulham and Bournemouth, similar sort of profile in terms of stature and revenue and all those things. Bournemouth are obviously going after these young, promising talents, quickly polishing them up and selling them for big money. That's half the you do have to sell them. And I think this summer has been bruising defensively, as you mentioned. You know, 3 of their back 5 have gone, if you include the goalkeeper, and it could be 4 if Sabani goes to PSG, which is looking increasingly likely. So it is all on how they sort of reinvest it. And I think they've done okay so far. I think George Petrovic is a great upgrade a great replacement for Kepa. I think he could be an upgrade, actually, because of how well he did at Strasbourg. It was some surprise, really. He didn't really have more of a look in at Chelsea, you know, considering the goalkeeper issues that they've had, and maybe even just a look a bit more. He didn't go to the Club World Cup. Adrien Truffert is really highly rated, as you said. comes in for Kirkes. They'd also brought in Julio Soler, an Argentinian young left back, in January. So they're always looking ahead, and it's sort of more following the Brighton way of doing things. They haven't got the centre-back, and I think centre-back is key, right? They've lost Dean Howson, they've got Marcus Senesi, of course, but if they lose Sabani as well, then you probably would be a little bit more concerned. The good thing, and obviously we're talking about these outgoings and they're big, and they do need to do a little bit more in the window, is that they've kept a lot of their attack. Antoine Semenyo signed a new contract. There was a lot of talk about what he might do this summer. Keeping him is huge. They've still got Justin Cliver. Alex Scott's had a brilliant summer, obviously with England under 21s. There's a bit of excitement about what he can do coming into this season. Evan Nielsen, they've signed this very exciting young striker from Lorient, Eli Krupi. So he's come back after being on loan there. So there's a little bit of, there are positives for Bournemouth to take, I think, and it hasn't been as much of an upheaval, I think, as you might fear. They do have to strengthen the defence, so I think that's clear because of just how big those changes are. And I think that's the balance with those models, right? If you do too much in a window, it can really unsettle you and you could fall off. But if you get it right, obviously there are big rewards for them, and the ownership are very ambitious, and I expect that they'll still have a strong season this year, and particularly under Iraola, who's obviously been brilliant for them since he's come in.
Yeah, you mentioned Iraola there. You talked a little bit about Fulham having to keep Marco Silva happy. Bournemouth have definitely got to keep Andoni Iraola happy. He was a manager much lauded by everyone in the media last season, including us on the Game podcast. How do you think he'll be approaching this season? Because he did brilliantly last season, then ends the season with lots of people touting him for a potential move to bigger clubs, with respect to Bournemouth, of course. The pressure will be slightly on him, though, won't there? Because, all his tricks and his tactics, we've had a season of them now. Opposition will know how he's going to play. Will he be looking to change it up, or will it be about consolidation this season, do you think?
I don't think he would change too much about his style and his approach and how successful that's been. And I think it's widely seen this way, that the way Bournemouth play, how direct and intense and aggressive they are, particularly off the ball, how pragmatic at times, is sort of the modern direction, and certainly the hallmark of the Premier League and the excitement that the league brings. He's in an interesting position. He's like Silva. I think he's in the final year of his contract as well, and Bournemouth would love to extend that for longer. I think for him, he has done quite a lot, and I think it'll be about maintaining that. And I think you obviously want, this is the other balance, right? What applies to players and their progression will also apply to coaches when you're at a club of this size. So Bournemouth will be well aware that, other clubs will be looking at him and the work he's doing and what kind of interest could materialise. And in order to keep him happy, and it is just to keep providing him with these exciting young players that he can then polish and then help to flourish going forward. So in terms of the way they play, I don't think we'll see too much change. Obviously, there's going to need to be some adaptability because of who they've lost and where they've lost them within the team. But there is that sort of progression, and they have still kept a good amount of their squad. So they'll certainly want to back him, and I think that we'll see that as the rest of the summer goes on.
Yeah, given that attacking talent that they've kept, I'm just again looking through their ranks. They've still got Cliver, as you say, Evan Nielsen. I'm too very excited to see what Alex Scott can produce in this midfield, a real young talent. Do we think that maybe just comparing them to Fulham in lots of ways, as we've already done, should they be aiming a little bit higher? Have they got a slightly better, stronger squad? Or is it just that they've got more exciting players maybe that burst onto the scene last season? Is that why I'm looking at it like that? There's something about them that suggests that maybe they should be thinking, could we be breaking into Europe, or should we be part of that cup conversation?
I think they want to get there. I think the same, as like I mentioned with Fulham, it's almost, I'd say it's a ceiling, but it's a very difficult bridge to gap until you start building other revenue sources. Obviously, Fulham have redeveloped their Riverside stand. Bournemouth have plans to redevelop their stadium. They've done a lot in terms of trying to bring in more hospitality and just generating money beyond just what's on the field. Without that, particularly with PSR, if you're a club of that size, you are very limited in terms of what you can invest. So for Bournemouth, it is a case of buying cheap, selling for big money, and they've got to try and get as many of these signings right as possible. So far, they've done that. So you go on what's for the precedent, and you expect them to continue doing that. Now, for them to continue to fight and to get into the European places, it is exceptional, and it should be seen as being exceptional. I think there's certainly disappointment that they fell off like they did last season, considering that the bulk of their key results, some really strong positive results mid-season, were achieved when so many in their squad were injured. When they got some of those players back towards the end of the season, the results sort of tailed off a little bit. So they'll be looking at that. They'll be looking at putting in the building blocks at the start of the season to try and maintain that consistency throughout a campaign. But that doesn't take away from how difficult it is to get into that top 7-8 bracket, because you can easily name 7-8 teams with much more resources available to them that can defeat Bournemouth. So you've got to be smart. It's the smart clubs that can try and break that sort of ceiling. And Bournemouth certainly have the ability to do that. I think after a summer which has seen such a key amount of their defence change, you wonder how much this year could be a little more transitional, as opposed to going straight back in and punching well above their weight like they did last year. But we'll see. I think a lot depends on who they get in. I know they're still looking for a centre-back, and they've looked at Loic Bade at Sevilla and Bafodé Diakite at Lille. So they are looking for these bright young central defenders as well. So we'll see if they can land one.
Yeah, Bournemouth and Fulham definitely hoping to punch above their weight. As you say, Pete, we'll see what's to come in the transfer market for both those sides, and indeed Chelsea. Pete Rutzler, thank you very much for joining us on this part 2 of our Premier League Club by Club preview shows. Thank you too for listening. We'll be back with the next instalment in this series with Charlotte Dunker and Gregor Robertson talking about both Manchester clubs, Nottingham Forest, Aston Villa and Wolves. We'll see you then.
Whether you're screaming from the stands or the sofa, Virgin Bet has even more for you to shout about this season. Because we're giving you a totally free bet builder on any Sunday football match every week this season. Virgin Bet. A good bet. Use Bet Builder free bet on any match this Sunday. Min odds evens. Max 1 free bet £1 to £20. Except via pop-up. T's and C's apply. Bet responsibly. Gambleaware.org. 18+.